The story begins by introducing two highly regarded students in the school. First, there's Suzune, a third-year student who also serves as the exceptional student council president, excelling both academically and in other areas. Alongside her is Kazuki, the student council's vice president and Suzune's younger brother. Rumors have been swirling around school, suggesting a potential romantic relationship between the two, given their strong support for each other in their student council roles. In contrast, there's Usato, an unassuming student who leads a simple high school life. Despite his ordinary status, Usato possesses a keen sense of observation, always attentive to his surroundings. One rainy day, Usato discovered that his umbrella had gone missing, leaving only one unidentified umbrella behind. He contemplated using it, but ultimately decided against it, considering the owner's situation. He patiently waited for the rain to subside, but it showed no sign of stopping. Not long after, Suzune noticed Usato lingering at school on that rainy day and inquired why he was still there. She correctly assumed that he didn't have an umbrella. Usato reluctantly admitted to this, without revealing that he actually had an umbrella that he couldn't find. He was about to head home in the rain when Suzune intervened, concerned about the reputation of the student council. Just then, Kazuki arrived and took the umbrella Usato intended to borrow. It turned out to be Kazuki's spare umbrella, and he kindly offered it to Usato. Suzune was relieved that Usato knew Kazuki, even though Usato was a bit surprised. It turned out that Kazuki and Usato were classmates who had never really spoken before. Kazuki knew Usato's name, and they decided to address each other informally like classmates do. As they walked home together, engaging in friendly conversation, Usato gained the confidence to ask the rumors about Suzune and Kazuki dating. They paused, turned to Usato, and calmly denied the rumors. Their close relationship was solely due to their roles in the student council. Suzune was impressed by Usato's courage in asking, as he was the first person to do so directly. Suzune suddenly inquired about Usato's plans for the future, but he hadn't really thought about it yet. This question surprised Kazuki as well, and Suzune asked the same thing of him. In reality, Suzune was just curious about other people's career aspirations because she also didn't have any clear plans for her own future. This contrasted with Suzune's underlying anxiety, which was quite different from someone like Usato. She often felt like she didn't quite belong where she was. Usato, even though he was different from Suzune, understood the feeling she was talking about. Then, something unusual happened. Kazuki and Suzune suddenly stopped in their tracks, and Usato, seeing them halt, also came to a stop. Kazuki wanted to confirm the faint sound of a bell he had heard, and Suzune heard it too, but Usato couldn't hear any such sound. In contrast, Suzune and Kazuki continued to hear the bell sound, which grew louder. Usato, taken aback, tried to approach Suzune and Kazuki. When they all stood in the same spot, a mysterious circle appeared beneath their feet. Only Usato seemed to understand what was happening. He recognized the circle as a magical one, possibly a portal to a different world or Isekai. However, Kazuki, a more rational person, thought it might be some kind of filming and couldn't quite grasp Usato's notions of Isekai and magic. On the other hand, everyone was surprised with Suzune's enthusiasm for discussing Isekai and magic. Usato began to suspect her true character, but those doubts were quickly dispelled. He decided to focus on their current situation, but ended up losing consciousness. In this state, Usato heard Kazuki calling his name repeatedly. He eventually woke up and asked Kazuki where they were and who else was with them. Kazuki, just awakened by Suzune, didn't have any answers. Suzune herself seemed quite excited about the unfolding situation. When they were all fully awake, a man wearing a crown began to address them. Kazuki, in his usual stern manner, demanded an explanation of what was happening. Someone advised him to be more polite in front of the man with the crown. This man was revealed to be Lloyd, the king of the Linker Kingdom. Upon hearing the identity of the person addressing them, only Suzune displayed extreme delight. The king explained that they had been summoned to the Linker Kingdom as heroes. This summoning of heroes was prompted by a crisis in the kingdom, which had arisen due to the appearance of the Demon King several years ago. The kingdom could no longer withstand the Demon King's increasingly powerful forces, so the decision was made to use forbidden magic to summon potential heroes from another world to come and defeat the Demon King. Kazuki was furious and demanded to be returned home, while Suzune remained joyful, and Usato felt disappointed because the image he had of Suzune was shattered. The king apologized, but he explained that the summoning could only be done in one direction, so there was no way to send them back. Kazuki got angry and invited the soldiers to point their weapons at him. Usato then tried to calm down Kazuki and appreciated Kazuki's anger, but he knew that their anger wouldn't change the situation. Slowly, Kazuki began to regain his composure. The king, seeing this, descended from his throne and knelt before them, promising to explore ways to send them back. However, they were also asked to lend their strength as heroes, and in response, all the subjects in the court knelt as well. It was then that Suzune spoke up, questioning why they were being labeled as heroes when they didn't even know who had been summoned. The king deferred to Welsi, the sorcerer responsible for the summoning, to explain. Welsi clarified that they were deemed heroes because the summoning magic had a formula that identified potential heroes. This formula was marked by the sound of a bell, which both Suzune and Kazuki had heard earlier, but not Usato. Therefore, it could be argued that Usato had been dragged along rather than actively summoned. To ascertain their magical potential, Welsi brought the three of them to a magic crystal for a direct assessment, a prospect that excited Suzune. During a conversation between Kazuki and Usato, Kazuki inquired about Usato's feelings. Usato acknowledged that he had come along not by choice but by circumstance. However, he decided to focus on what lay ahead rather than dwelling on the unchangeable past. After Welsi prepared her crystal ball, Suzune was the first to make contact. The crystal ball emitted a golden light upon her touch, signifying her affinity for the lightning element. Next was Kazuki, and his touch resulted in a bright white light, indicative of the light element. Kazuki was puzzled by the significance and advantages of the light element, and Suzune attempted to provide an explanation that left Kazuki thoroughly confused. Usato tried to stop Suzune, but she appreciated his attitude. The perception Usato had constructed of Suzune had completely crumbled. Welsi went on to explain that the light element was considered the most potent element to combat the Demon King. It was Usato's turn next, and he harbored doubts about possessing a magical element. If he could have one, he hoped for a power that could assist Suzune and Kazuki. When Usato made contact with the crystal ball, a soothing green color emanated from it. Kazuki and Suzune were equally fascinated by the appearance of this green color. However, Welsi, who began to panic, was far from pleased. She hastily grabbed Usato and whisked him away, exclaiming that she needed to report this discovery. Welsi escorted Usato back to the king and reported that Usato's magic element had manifested as green. The king's eyes widened upon hearing this revelation, as the green element was exceptionally rare. Without hesitation, the king decided that Usato should be kept far away from the castle. At the same time, a person with long green hair walked through the castle corridor. Gathering his courage, Usato inquired about the danger of his magic element and the absence of others with similar elements. The king responded with hesitation, acknowledging that there were indeed individuals with the same magic element as Usato, but they were deemed perilous. Before he could finish explaining, the green-haired person burst into the room, boldly confronting the king. Surprisingly, no one objected, not even the king himself. The person questioned the hero summoning ceremony that had recently taken place. The king casually referred to her as Rose and inquired if she should be on vacation. However, Rose, as a loyal servant, asserted that she couldn't possibly take a break. Rose approached Usato and stood by his side. She then turned to him and inquired if he was the hero. Overwhelmed with fear, Usato unconsciously backed against the wall. The king then clarified that Usato was not a hero, but rather someone who had been inadvertently pulled into the hero summoning, lacking any special powers. After a moment of exchanged glances between Rose and the king, Rose directed her attention back to Usato. She requested his name, and Usato hesitantly obliged. Rose then introduced herself as the captain of the kingdom's rescue force. In his thoughts, Usato couldn't help but feel that Rose appeared more like an executioner than a savior for the kingdom. Trying to divert Rose's attention, Welsi invited her to meet the heroes in the crystal room, hoping to keep her away from Usato. Rose agreed and started heading towards the crystal room. The king then turned his attention back to Usato. He'd assured Usato that they would figure things out later, and for now, Usato was allowed to rest in a prepared room. However, things took an unexpected turn as Usato found himself inquiring about his green magic element once more, just as Rose was about to leave the room. Rose overheard the conversation, halted in her tracks, and turned back to face Usato. She verified that the green color she had heard was accurate. Usato reflexively nodded, confirming what Rose had said. Rose then requested the king's permission to borrow Usato for a while, even though she planned to take him without official consent. The king urgently called for Welsi to remove Usato from Rose's presence. Using her magic, Welsi enveloped Usato and hurled him out of the castle. Rose then relentlessly pursued Usato, even leaping high into the air above the castle. Initially, Rose struck the magical barrier surrounding Usato until it shattered. Startled, Usato fainted and began to fall, but Rose caught him before he could hit the ground. The king and the soldiers rushed to the window to see what had transpired with Usato. Rose shouted to the king that she would be Usato's mentor from now on until he became a proficient healer. With Usato unconscious on her back, Rose departed. The king's protests about Usato being a mere bystander who had been inadvertently involved faded into the distance, unheard by Rose. On the other hand, Suzune and Kazuki were shocked by the news about Usato. Welsi explained that Rose had taken Usato to a location somewhat distant from the palace, where he would receive training as a healer. Because Usato possessed an exceedingly rare healing element, and Rose was one of the skilled healing sorcerers, she had decided to train Usato as her apprentice. While Suzune thought it was a positive development, what struck Welsi, as well as the king and the soldiers, as unusual was Rose's unconventional approach to education. When night fell, Usato had fully regained consciousness, and he found himself in a house that was far from the palace. Standing before him was Rose, who began to explain the situation. She told Usato that he had the potential to become a healer, and for that reason, she had brought him to join the rescue team for training. This house would now serve as Usato's new residence. Rose then introduced him to the other prospective members of his team, who appeared just as formidable as Rose herself. The first person she introduced was Tong, followed by Mil, Olex, Gommel, and Gerd. Usato immediately felt a surge of fear and began apologizing profusely. He couldn't help but wonder if he was merely meant to be a sacrificial pawn for these 5 individuals standing before him. Rose then intervened and scolded one of her subordinates for frightening Usato. They denied any ill intentions, claiming it was merely a warm welcome. Rose clarified that the 5 of them were her subordinates, but not healing sorcerers. There were still 2 healing sorcerers within the rescue team, but they were stationed elsewhere. Therefore, Rose herself would be the one to personally train Usato. Although Usato's instincts pulled him to request a different mentor, Rose paid no attention to his concerns. She then informed Usato that his training would commence the following day and advised him to prepare himself. Not long after, Usato was assigned to the same room as Tong. Rose bid them good night and left, and as she departed, her 5 subordinates jokingly warned Usato that his training might feel like hell or even worse, since he would be under Rose's direct guidance. Despite his curiosity about what lay ahead, Usato ultimately chose to get some rest and sleep through the night. In a separate room, Rose herself began contemplating her new apprentice, who possessed the rare healing magic element and had arrived from another world. The following morning in the Linger Kingdom, Usato woke up, initially thinking that the events of the previous day were just a dream. However, as he glanced around his new surroundings, he soon realized that it was all too real. He had truly been transported to an Isekai world. As he lost in thought, he was interrupted by Suzune and Kazuki that come to check on him, who concerned about his abrupt arrival in this world. Usato then apologized for causing them worry, but assured them that he was all right for the time being, though he couldn't guarantee what the future held. His rigorous training was set to begin today, and his chances of survival for the upcoming days remained uncertain. Nevertheless, Usato had no intentions of fleeing. He planned to do his best with what lay ahead. Kazuki was inspired by Usato's determination, and Suzune, ever-spirited and optimistic, had no worries at all as she was the most spirited among them after arriving in this Isekai world. Not long after, both Kazuki and Suzune were about to embark on their own hero training within the palace. Usato then wondered what hero training entailed and thought it might be quite impressive. Even their uniforms, worn by Suzune and Kazuki, looked far superior to his own. Kazuki patted Usato on the back, expressing gratitude. Thanks to Usato's presence, Kazuki had found the resolve to face their challenges head-on, just like Usato and Suzune. With renewed determination, they all headed back to the palace to commence their training. Usato looked up to his two incredible friends and aspired to be of assistance to them in the future. Just then, Rose made her appearance, confirming the return of the two heroes and informing Usato that his training would begin after breakfast and Usato needed to prepare himself promptly. Rose handed Usato an empty book, suggesting that he use it as a journal, which might prove valuable in the future if he documented his training activities, lessons, and experiences. With that, their arduous training journey began. The first day of Usato's training began with him attempting to sense the magical energy within himself. The next lesson involved learning how to release this magical energy. Rose then handed him a book to read, and although Usato initially believed he couldn't understand the script in this new world, Rose ordered him to open the book. To his surprise, Usato found that he could read the letters in the book. In fact, everyone summoned from another world automatically gained translation abilities. The book contained valuable information about the country of Linger. Situated right next to the territory of the Demon King, Linger was the primary target of the Demon King's aggression. Rose then instructed Usato to read the book to familiarize himself with the country, its various races, and the world's monsters. With that, the first day of training proceeded without any major challenges, and Usato felt that he could handle it if the training continued in this manner. On the second day of training, Usato was tasked with continuous running. This task continued on the third day with even more intensity, pushing him to the point of muscle exhaustion. During his stumbling, Rose unexpectedly kicked Usato in the leg. Usato cried out and rolled around, expecting pain, but instead, he felt lighter. Rose explained that her kicks were actually a method of forcibly treating Usato's fatigued muscles. She then ordered him to resume running until exhaustion, reassuring him that she would heal him if necessary. Usato didn't fully grasp the purpose of this training, but he resolved to record it in his journal. As the days progressed, Usato continued his running exercises, gradually improving his endurance. He ran alongside the other members, although he still lagged behind. On the fifth day, as he continued his grueling runs until evening, a faint glimmer of green light began to emanate from his hand. On the sixth day of training, Usato continued his strictly running routine despite the rain pouring down. Rose observed him running in the rain, and Usato, struggling on the slippery terrain, couldn't help but feel frustrated with Rose, whom he considered extremely cruel in her training methods. He had even planned to depict her as an antagonist in his diary. However, during this challenging moment, he witnessed his hand emitting a soft green light of healing magic, even though he didn't require healing at that very moment, and Rose noticed this development. The seventh day brought even more grueling training for Usato, as he received a powerful kick to his lower back, propelling him forward to continue running. Rose, noticing Usato's apparent anger, declared her intention to intensify his training further. Usato was taken aback and suspected that Rose might have somehow read his diary, where he had referred to her as a cold-hearted witch. However, it seemed impossible for Rose to understand Japanese characters, so the reason could only be his facial expression. Rose firmly grasped Usato's shirt collar and threw him, urging him to keep running. Frustrated, Usato decided to refer to Rose as a gorilla in his diary. On the eighth day, the relentless training continued with relentless running and Rose's punches and kicks. On the ninth day, Usato, who had initially thought he didn't need healing magic, came to realize its significance through Rose's teachings, and he began to utilize his healing magic to mend his tired body. He resumed his running training, with Rose closely monitoring his progress. With newfound healing abilities, Usato no longer felt exhausted, no matter how far he ran. Yet, he couldn't shake his anxiety about whether this seemingly endless running regimen would genuinely prepare him to assist Kazuki and Suzune in the future. Reluctant to question Rose directly, he found himself suddenly slapped with an additional 30 rounds of running as punishment, which left him both incredulous and increasingly losing respect for Rose. However, he remained determined to endure this grueling training and eventually confront Rose. On the 11th day of training, Usato's routine extended beyond running as he engaged in a substantial number of push-ups. During this session, he began emanating the soft green glow of his healing magic all over his body. Rose, who sat nearby, observed Usato's push-ups and questioned whether he understood the purpose of this rigorous physical training. She explained that it was to enhance his ability to swiftly escape from enemies during battles and provide aid to wounded comrades. The faster Usato could move, the more efficiently he could assist his allies. These words momentarily paused Usato's push-ups, earning him a scolding from Rose. He quickly resumed his exercises that day, and surprisingly, the training ended without the usual harsh scolding from Rose, and Usato experienced both relief and lingering fear. The 12th day brought hours of running in the morning until noon, followed by an evening of intense push-ups. Usato then started to notice significant improvements as his body felt progressively lighter. On the 13th day, Usato adhered to his usual running task, but with the added challenge of carrying heavy weights that made his task exceedingly difficult. The 14th day took an unexpected turn as Usato discovered his lunch had disappeared, consumed by one of his companions. Anger surged within him, and he attempted to confront the culprit. Their confrontation soon escalated into a chase. Usato had also grown accustomed to the burden of the weights on his back and continued his training effectively. A week later, during his training with the kingdom's princess and the trainers of Kazuki and Suzune, Kazuki and Suzune themselves paid Usato a visit. They were surprised to witness Usato in the midst of his training, performing push-ups with a massive concrete block on his back while Rose sat on top. Here, Rose taunted Usato, noting that his movements had slowed compared to earlier. Usato had now developed the courage to respond to Rose's taunts, even going as far as remarking that Rose was still rather lightweight for him. In response, Rose dismounted and added another concrete block on top of the one already on Usato's back. Initially resisting, Usato's healing magic started, and he began to perform push-ups with both blocks, proving his determination and resilience. Usato had been making progress in line with Rose's preferences, and she began to think that he might reach his potential more rapidly. When the visiting guests witnessed Usato's intense training, they were taken aback, except for Suzune, who was genuinely impressed by the well-defined muscles Usato had developed through his grueling task. On the other hand, Kazuki and Suzune's trainer, a man named Sieglitz, was not pleased with Rose's training methods. He firmly grasped Rose's collar and expressed his anger, claiming that her training could shatter the spirits of young trainees. However, Rose remained undaunted. She acknowledged Sieglitz's knightly spirit, but asserted that she had her own unique training methods. As a demonstration of her strength, Rose effortlessly deformed Sieglitz's armored arm with her grip. She stated that Usato was destined to become her right-hand man, and for that reason, she couldn't afford to be lenient in her training. This revelation shocked both Sieglitz and Usato, who couldn't believe that he was to become Rose's right-hand man. Surprisingly, Rose appreciated Usato's unwavering determination, and even admitted that he had endured her training impressively. Usato was disappointed to discover that his attempt to defy Rose had won her favor. Rose then granted Usato a lunch break, assuming he might want to converse with his friends. However, Usato complied and repositioned the two concrete blocks. Sieglitz then asked Kazuki and Suzune to look after Princess Celia, while he discussed matters with Rose. He strongly objected to Rose's teaching methods and her decision to rejoin the imperial military. Meanwhile, Kazuki, Suzune, Usato, and Princess Celia engaged in conversation. Usato learned that Sieglitz was not only the commander of the Linger Kingdom's military, but also the mightiest knight and the instructor for heroes training in swordsmanship. Usato was in awe upon hearing this information, and then inquired about the identity of the girl accompanying them. He discovered that she was Princess Celia, the royal princess of the Linger Kingdom. In a show of respect, Usato promptly stepped back and prostrated himself, apologizing for any perceived rudeness. The princess encouraged Usato to act naturally, but his expression mirrored Kazuki's when they first met. She kindly brought them food to share, and Usato gratefully accepted her gesture. Kazuki then inquired about Usato's recent training, wondering if it was his regular routine. Usato honestly admitted that today's training had been lighter than usual and also asked about Kazuki's and Suzune's hero training. Kazuki was somewhat surprised, explaining that heroes underwent rigorous training, learning swordsmanship from Sieglitz and magic from Welsi. Their physical and mental conditions were closely monitored. Usato, on the other hand, considered their training normal and believed Rose to be the harsh one. Kazuki apologized, which confused Usato, and he requested another slice of pie. But Suzune noticed something unusual. She inspected Usato's body, which had developed muscles from his training, with great enthusiasm. Usato tried to calm her and sought help from Kazuki and the princess, covering his face with his hands while peeking at Suzune's actions. Kazuki explained that they were concerned about Usato's well-being, asking if he felt too heavy. Usato frankly admitted that he had initially found the training burdensome and had considered running away. However, he had since adapted and started enjoying it. Despite Rose's intimidation, Usato no longer wanted to escape. His goal was to assist Kazuki and Suzune in their future hero battles. Everyone was astonished when they saw the green light emitting from Usato's hands, and Suzune's behavior made them all burst into laughter. Not long after, members of Rose's group, who had previously consumed Usato's lunch, arrived and mentioned that they had prepared a new meal for him. Usato responded somewhat defiantly, surprising the others with his assertiveness. They began playfully roughhousing, confusing the princess. Kazuki reassured her that it was Usato's daily routine, and Suzune confirmed it. Usato had swiftly adapted to his new life, motivating everyone to persevere in their training. Later, while relaxing in the bath, Usato felt content about his friend's visit, but was taken aback by Suzune's actions. He realized that he had indeed changed, although he still harbored doubts about whether he possessed the right mindset for his transformed physique and whether he could fulfill his battlefield duties. The following morning, Rose announced that they would have outdoor training for the day, and Usato received a heavy bag, which surprised the other group members, as they hadn't seen him participate in outdoor training before. The gatekeeper was visibly frightened by Rose's presence and quickly opened the gate for them. Usato wanted to ask where they were headed, but Rose simply instructed him to stay quiet and follow her lead. Not long after, they reached the edge of a cliff, and Rose pointed towards the infamous Lingerdark Forest, known to be a monster's dwelling. Usato's training for the day was to defeat the Grand Grizzly, a formidable blue bear that had lived for over a century. Young blue grizzlies were particularly dangerous, but Rose believed that Usato could handle it now. Usato was hesitant since his training had focused solely on running, and he lacked combat skills. Frustrated by his reluctance, Rose promptly tossed Usato off the cliff and into the forest below. Usato did his best to survive the fall and landed safely. However, he soon realized he had to confront the Grand Grizzly. The beast emerged from the bushes and began chasing Usato relentlessly. Usato was confident in his running abilities, but to his surprise, the bear kept up with him. He started to regain confidence, believing that he had successfully completed Rose's grueling training. He decided to confront the bear head-on. However, 2 more blue grizzlies appeared, joining the pursuit. Usato eventually heard the sound of flowing water and rushed towards it. As he suspected, he found a waterfall up ahead, and without hesitation, Usato leaped off the waterfall, leaving the 3 grizzlies behind. Once he was in the water, the bears gave up the chase. Usato swam to the shore and sought refuge. He opened the bag he had brought along, containing basic survival gear. Although he remained unsure of how to defeat the Grand Grizzly, he decided to ponder it further the next day. The following day, Usato started his second day with observation. He concealed a dagger beneath his clothes, planning to study the Grand Grizzly's behavior and habits to understand the monster better. Venturing deeper into the forest, Usato noticed some rustling bushes nearby. He stayed cautious and alert, but to his surprise, it was a rabbit-like creature. The creature was wounded and surprisingly could understand Usato. Usato tended to its injuries, and the creature began to follow him around. Usato asked the rabbit if it knew where the Grand Grizzly's den was, and the rabbit led him in the right direction. They arrived near the den of the Grand Grizzly, confirming what Usato had read in the book, that these bears lived in groups. Inside the den, the 3 bears that had chased him earlier seemed like a peaceful family. Reluctantly, Usato used water from a nearby source, and the rabbit approached him once more. This time, their goal was to observe the life of the Grand Grizzly, but soon after, Usato felt pain in his stomach, likely from the water he had consumed earlier, which acted like poison. The pain only subsided when his magic was activated, and once again, the rabbit approached him. The following day, the rabbit guided Usato to a source of water that was safe to drink. Usato checked it and found it to be clearer and safer than the previous water source. Suddenly, the rabbit became alert and led Usato to a tree. Usato witnessed the rabbit displaying fear for the first time. Even when confronted by the group of Grand Grizzlies, it hadn't shown fear until now. Shortly after, a massive snake-like creature passed by. While it wasn't mentioned in the book, Usato sensed its danger and felt a menacing presence. He unconsciously held his breath until the snake departed, avoiding detection. Though Usato felt uneasy, he continued to observe the peaceful grizzly family. However, he knew that without defeating the grizzlies, he couldn't return. He resolved to complete his mission the next day. The next day, Usato prepared to leave for his mission. The rabbit stopped him from going outside. Usato followed the rabbit's advice and waited inside until the rain stopped. Once the rain had stopped, he hurried to the grizzly's den. To his shock, he discovered the lifeless bodies of the grand grizzly and blue grizzly, the same ones that had chased him earlier, as his prey had been stolen. Usato was certain that Rose would be furious because his intended targets had perished. Upon seeing bite marks, he was convinced that the snake-like creature he had encountered earlier was responsible. Sadly, the snake had killed the grizzly family. At the same time, something emerged from the cave, revealing a surviving cub from the grizzly family, though it had lost its parents. Usato felt a surge of anger, unwilling to lose to Rose. He disliked having his target taken away and despised the idea of his determination going to waste. As the young grizzly cub mourning the loss of its mother, Usato was now resolute on avenging the grizzly family, but the grizzly cub was equally determined for revenge. The scene then shifted to Rose's house, where Kazuki and Suzune came to visit Usato. However, they couldn't locate him, as Usato was supposedly training in the forest with Rose and had been absent for 10 days. They had to return empty-handed, and Suzune noticed the seriousness in Kazuki's concern for Usato. Kazuki was genuinely worried about his friend, and Suzune revealed her own concerns. Yet, as long as Usato was under Rose's training, she believed there wouldn't be any issues. She had faith in Usato, as did Kazuki. Returning to Usato, he readied himself to confront the snake and crafted a spear. Feeling prepared, he asked the rabbit to lead him to the snake's location. Upon arrival, he found the snake was facing off with the young grizzly. Usato felt fear but reassured himself that there was no creature scarier than Rose. He moved to attack, but his initial step nearly led to his demise as the snake lunged at him. He swiftly dodged and thrust his spear into one of the snake's eyes. The snake then flung Usato against a tree, but he managed to lessen his injuries. Usato swiftly drawing his dagger and targeted the snake's right side, still suffering from partial blindness due to the previous spear attack. However, Usato fell into the snake's trap as it guided him towards its blind spot. The snake successfully bit one of Usato's arms, yet in that very moment, Usato remained undaunted. In fact, he was somewhat pleased because the bitten arm held the dagger he had previously thrust into the roof of the snake's mouth. Usato and the snake locked eyes, and he summoned his healing magic to strengthen his injured arm, pushing the dagger deeper into the snake's flesh. The snake then released Usato's arm, but its bite had injected venom. Fortunately, Usato had learned to heal poison when he had experienced stomach pain earlier. He charged at the snake once more, narrowly evading its tail strike. The young grizzly joined the battle to help Usato, and he climbed onto the snake's head, delivering a mighty blow that caused the snake to lose its balance. Usato also forced the dagger deeper into the snake's right eye, causing it to collapse. Both the snake and Usato fell, and he lay on his back, relieved by his success. The young grizzly approached Usato, and though he wanted to heal the wounds, he lacked the strength to even heal himself. He couldn't move, and the young grizzly attempted to carry him away, but it was not strong enough. Usato then urged the grizzly to save itself, but the young grizzly refused to abandon him. Resigned to his fate, Usato recalled Kazuki, Suzune, and particularly Rose, holding her responsible for this task. He vented his frustration, harshly labeling Rose as cruel, brutal, and insane. At that moment, Rose descended and swiftly struck the snake, instantly killing it with her powerful attack that drove her leg into the snake's head. Usato was surprised and confused by Rose's sudden appearance, wondering why she was there. And it was all thanks to the black rabbit he had aided earlier, which had followed him. This rabbit was Kukuru, Rose's pet, instructed to keep a watchful eye on Usato. Kukuru had even feigned injuries to gain Usato's trust. Throughout this time, Rose had remained at the forest's edge, keep guarding in case Usato encountered an emergency. She didn't want to interfere with his mission, but had unexpectedly intervened when the snake appeared. The snake had been modified by the Demon Lord's army, and had once defeated Seaglees during the final battle. Rose hadn't anticipated that the snake had also killed the Grand Grizzly, an opponent that even the elite forces of the Leander Kingdom couldn't defeat without sustaining injuries. And this revelation surprised Usato. As the elite forces couldn't conquer it, how could he do it? Rose's intention wasn't solely Usato's success. Instead, she aimed to provide him with the experience of confronting a formidable adversary. Nevertheless, Rose was genuinely impressed by Usato's accomplishments. Rose's curiosity drove her to allow Usato's battle to continue, even though he had come dangerously close to death. The young grizzly bravely stepped forward, baring its fangs at Rose. She remarked that it seemed the young grizzly had grown fond of Usato. Seeing the orphaned grizzlies, Usato felt a surge of sympathy and gently petted it, receiving friendly affection in return. This only deepened Rose's belief that Usato shared similarities with her. Convinced of Usato's connection with the young grizzly, Rose instructed the blue grizzly to join them and assist the nearly lifeless Usato. The blue grizzly obediently lifted Usato onto its back, and Kukuru clung to Usato as well. With her incredible strength, Rose effortlessly lifted the trio with a single arm. As they prepared to return, Usato feared that Rose might not let him sleep peacefully that night after the curses he had hurled at her. However, Usato had surpassed Rose's expectations. She declared that Usato had met the qualifications to stand on the battlefield alongside her. Although he still lacked in certain areas, Usato showed potential. His body could endure pain, his physical abilities were impressive, and he possessed a resolute mentality, qualities that the other two healers lacked. Rose believed that there might be a chance for them as the Demon Lord's imminent attack loomed. The scene then shifted to the Demon Lord's domain, where the Demon Lord awaited a report from one of his subordinates, Commander Amila. The preparations for their assault on the Linger Kingdom were proceeding smoothly, and their troops were being readied for an imminent attack. The scene continued with Rose, emphasizing that the Demon Lord's forces were on the brink of launching an attack, and war was imminent. She revealed that Usato would stand alongside her as a healing magician at the forefront. Despite the presence of Tong and others, as well as two additional healers serving as healing magicians on the front lines, it would be Usato and Rose who would be directly involved. Usato had reservations about sharing responsibilities with Rose, doubting his abilities. However, Rose reassured him that he had time to prepare himself before facing the impending battlefield. On the side of the Demon Lord's army, the Demon Lord closely monitored the progress of preparations for their impending assault on the Linger Kingdom, led by his subordinates. The Demon Lord displayed no urgency to launch the attack prematurely and instead instructed Commander Amila to ensure they were thoroughly prepared. After a meeting with the Demon Lord, Amila convened with Hirieluk, known as the Monster Doctor. Hirieluk's role involved modifying demon monsters, such as the snake that Usato had encountered. Hirieluk had created a new, upgraded version of that monster, named the demon's 72nd monster Balginuk, with enhanced strength and abilities compared to its predecessor. Amila hoped that this new monster would outperform the previous one because on the Linger Kingdom side, there was a figure they were cautious of, someone known as the Kidnapper. The Kidnapper didn't engage in direct battles, but instead swiftly evacuated injured warriors from the battlefield. Although this might seem insignificant, the Kidnapper's presence had significantly reduced casualties on the Linger Kingdom side. The mastermind behind the Kidnappers was a perpetual Dark Knight healer, skilled at tending to wounded soldiers directly on the front lines, eliminating the need to transport them to the rear for treatment, and this formidable individual was Rose. It turned out Rose had previously clashed with Amila's superior, fueling Amila's desire for revenge. However, as the appointed commander, Amila herself would not enter direct combat. Therefore, the task of dealing with Rose was entrusted to an eternal Dark Knight magician known as the Black Knight. After enduring rigorous training in the forest, Usato returned to his home and settled into his room. He showed great care and attention to Blue Grizzly, his faithful companion from the forest. Blue Grizzly wasn't the only one seeking Usato's company. Kukuru, the Black Rabbit, also wanted to be close to him. While Usato was initially hesitant, remembering how Kukuru had manipulated him for Rose's benefit before, Kukuru's adorable gestures eventually warmed his heart. Usato decided to give Blue Grizzly a name, Blurine. When he mentioned Blurine's name, Rose arrived to confirm the official status of the name Usato had chosen for Blue Grizzly as a member of their unit. Rose had reported Blurine to Lloyd and received permission. From that moment on, Blurine would be considered an asset of the rescue unit. While Blurine could stay with them, it came with the expectation that Blurine would have a role to play. Usato wondered what Blurine's role would be, but Rose immediately ordered him to have Blurine carry the same weights Usato usually wore while running, simulating the conditions of the battlefield. Rose wanted Usato to experience what it would be like in the future when he had to run while carrying wounded soldiers. She wanted him to imagine Blurine as an injured soldier in need of medical assistance during his training. To make it a realistic simulation, Tong and others were present to act as obstacles, creating a challenging environment for Usato. Usato pushed himself to run while bearing the heavy load and dodging the obstacles. However, he found himself unable to even reach the halfway point before his body gave in, and he collapsed from exhaustion. Usato was surprised because he could typically endure for half a day. Rose approached him and explained that it was the unique stamina demands of the battlefield that were affecting his endurance. In a real battle, a person's stamina could easily deplete due to anxiety, fear, and nervousness, which was why Usato was getting tired more quickly than he was used to. After his training with Rose, Usato was curious about how to proceed. As he questioned her, Rose gently closed Usato's eyes while she healed him, and she explained that he needed to become accustomed to his situation, strengthen his mental resolve, and approach every situation as he normally would. Rose then directed Usato to explore the town and palace once he had regained his strength, all while carrying Blurine on his back. Walking through the town streets, Usato couldn't help but notice that all eyes were on him and Blurine as they moved. Usato had expected the attention, but something struck him as odd. Blurine suddenly woke up, sensing its favorite food nearby. They'd paused briefly at a fruit shop selling Blurine's beloved fruit. Usato openly admitted to the elderly woman running the shop that he had no money and was only inquiring about Blurine's favorite fruit. He asked her the name of the fruit, which turned out to be a Linger Kingdom specialty called Peiful. Usato then asked another question to that, wondering why were people not making a fuss or reacting strongly to him running around with a monster on his back. However, the elderly woman casually replied that they recognized Usato as a member of the rescue unit. They were familiar with the attire worn by the rescue unit members, who were often seen energetically moving around town, and the locals had grown accustomed to these surprises. Usato soon realized that this reaction was perfectly normal for members of the rescue unit. After that, he thanked the elderly woman and received a Peiful as a gesture of goodwill, which he promptly gave to Blurine before continuing their city tour. While Usato continued his run with Blurine on his back, they discussed visiting Kazuki and Suzune at the palace. Amid their conversation, a blond man noticed Usato's uniform and attempted to catch up with him. However, Usato, deeply engrossed in his chat with Blurine, remained oblivious to the man's presence, causing him to lag behind. It was only after a moment that Usato became aware of someone trying to get his attention. He paused briefly, healing the blond man, whose name was Orga Fleur. Orga, a fellow healing magician and a member of the rescue unit, went to greet his junior. Despite not having a naturally loud voice, Orga ran and shouted to catch up with Usato. As they conversed, Usato shared his story, explaining how he had been accidentally summoned with the heroes and had undergone Rose's rigorous training. Orga then commended Usato for enduring the demanding training that Rose provided, noting that he and his younger sister couldn't keep up with it. Both Orga and his sister were healing magicians in the rescue unit who operated a clinic in the kingdom, responsible for using their healing magic to care for the city's residents. Usato also found it puzzling that Orga couldn't heal himself, and Orga clarified that while he excelled at healing others, he lacked the ability to heal himself. Healing magicians often had their own specialties, but in critical situations, Orga and his sister would also support Rose. Usato recalled Rose's words about him needing to be at the forefront. Curious about his role on the battlefield, he asked Orga. Orga then explained that he and his sister served as the rear guard, healing wounded soldiers secured by Tong and others in the rear lines. Usato then revealed his designation to be on the front lines alongside Rose, which surprised Orga. Usato felt somewhat pessimistic and uncertain about his abilities for frontline duty. However, Orga empathized, emphasizing that knights and heroes face the greatest risks in battle, and if they were fatally wounded and left behind, their fate would likely be grim. Hearing that, Usato's mind drifted to his friends identified as heroes. Orga elaborated on the importance of healing magicians on the front lines, as they could save those who faced great risks. He acknowledged the difficulty and high risk of the job, but believed that Rose wouldn't make such decisions without careful consideration. As they parted ways, Orga returned to the clinic before his little sister could scold him, and Usato continued his training. Before parting, Orga advised Usato not to hold too much resentment toward Rose, highlighting that she wasn't a heartless and cruel person, but rather someone who struggled with social interactions. Usato responded that despite his numerous complaints, he had never truly hated Rose from the beginning. With that, Usato left, leaving Orga relieved, as Rose had finally found the person she was searching for. Soon after Orga's conversation with Usato, a girl with the same hair color as Orga approached him, addressing him as her older brother. She appeared deeply concerned about Orga, but he assured her that he had just met someone interesting, and that she would soon have the chance to meet him as well. On the other hand, Usato proceeded to visit the palace, and thanks to his affiliation with Rose, he easily gained entry, even while carrying Blurine. As one of Rose's trusted subordinates, came with the advantage of effortless access to various areas. Inside the palace, Usato noticed knights engaged in training, including Suzune. She then immediately halted her training when she spotted Usato, but her attention was soon drawn to the large blue creature on his back. Curious, Suzune inquired about the creature's identity, and Usato explained that it was the offspring of a grizzly and a blue grizzly monster that had accompanied him during his survival training in the monster forest. Although Usato spoke enthusiastically, Suzune seemed less interested in his words, as her focus was on the slumbering Blurine. Suzune couldn't resist the urge to touch Blurine, but her attempt was met with Blurine swatted her hand away. Startled, Suzune recoiled, and Usato hurriedly explained that Blurine wasn't accustomed to strangers to prevent Suzune from feeling upset. Surprisingly, Suzune's reaction wasn't sadness. Instead, she became even more eager after the brief contact with Blurine. Usato suggested that Suzune should call Blurine by name to establish a friendship, an idea that excited Suzune. However, this time, Blurine didn't just swat, it playfully bit Suzune's hand. Usato attempted to calm Suzune down, suggesting that perhaps Blurine had sensed Suzune's hidden intentions. However, Blurine swatted at Suzune's hand and turned its attention to Usato's hand, playfully nibbling on it. Suzune reacted similarly to how Usato had earlier. She remarked that it had been a while since they had last met, and Usato agreed. He couldn't help but notice Suzune's hands, marked with scars and calluses, evidence of her dedicated training. Usato gently took Suzune's hand and used his healing magic to smooth out the rough skin. Suzune blushed and asked if Usato had come specifically to see her, to which he happily and honestly confirmed that he had indeed come to meet both Suzune and Kazuki. Usato's candidness unintentionally caused Suzune some emotional turmoil, though he remained unaware of it. Suzune then informed Usato that Kazuki was currently away for training with Seaglees and a few others outside the kingdom, focusing on gaining experience in fighting monsters. Usato expressed some concern for Kazuki, but Suzune reassured him that the training would only last for a few days. After Kazuki returned, Suzune herself would embark on similar training. She was brimming with enthusiasm about the upcoming challenges, and Usato had already figured that out. Suzune also hoped for Usato's concern, which he readily offered, being genuinely worried about his senior. With their conversation coming to an end, Usato took his lead to resume his training. In that moment, Suzune noticed a change in Usato, as he had become a more honest and straightforward person than before. Not long after, as Usato continued his training, he couldn't help but feel inspired by the enthusiasm of his two friends and the looming proximity of the battlefield. He wanted to be there with them, rather than remaining in the safety of the rear lines. In his previous world, Usato had been limited to adding up numbers he couldn't physically reach, but now he had undergone a significant transformation. That night, after taking care of Blurine and ensuring its rest, Usato spotted Rose on the terrace. Rose inquired about his day's training and whether Usato had started to adapt to it. Usato hesitated before answering, but he expressed his determination to continue with the training. He approached Rose, sharing his thoughts about the need to prepare himself. Usato then recounted the near-death encounter with the snake monster in the forest and how immediately afterward, Rose had discussed the impending battle and the presence of the Demon King's forces. Initially, it had filled Usato with fear, and he had been reluctant to engage in combat if he could avoid it. However, something had changed within him today. Usato had decided that he wouldn't seek to kill the enemy, but rather to save Kazuki, Suzune, and anyone else he could. He realized that this was his duty as a member of the rescue unit. Rose approved of Usato's resolution, approaching him with a smile and telling him it was enough. The rescue unit's primary mission was to save lives. Usato needed to let go of any thoughts of self-sacrifice, steer clear of enemies seeking to harm him, and even if it meant putting his own life on the line, his role was to save those in need. It was the solemn duty of the rescue unit, From that night onward, Usato felt like a true member of the rescue unit. Early the next morning, Rose barged into Usato's room and threw a bag filled with items right onto the still sleeping Usato. She informed him that she had received a message from Lloyd the previous day, stating that Usato was summoned to the palace to accompany Suzune for training outside. Moral lesson from the story: life can be as unpredictable as a grizzly's appetite for painful fruit. You just have to roll with the training, even if it means jogging through town with a blue grizzly hitching a ride on your back, all in the name of hero training.